Hello, Lynn. Greetings to you. It's wonderful to talk to you today. How are you?
I'm very well. It's nice to talk to you too, Katja.
Thank you. So today we are doing a little interview to discuss some background information about your book and also to promote said book, How German Ingenuity Inspired America, More Fun, More Beauty, and More Freedom. German immigration has tremendously influenced the United States. Many people know bits and pieces about this, but they don't know the whole story. And that's partly because German immigration experienced its heyday in the 19th century, which none of us really lived through. But if we're completely honest, it has never stopped. And even today, Germans continue to come to the US. Some may only stay for a few years, others make their move permanent, and some remain in flux and split their time between countries and continents. The traditional German communities, such as the little German towns of yesteryear, have mostly disappeared, but the traces remain. And that's really what your book is all about. The traces that Germans left in the United States all over the country, not just in those strongholds in the Midwest, but really everywhere. So tell me, Lynn, please, what inspired you to write this book?
One man. There was a man who lived the next town over from mine. His name was Ernst Flotter, and he was known all over mid-Michigan, really. He had been a prisoner of war. He was born in Germany in 1925. When he turned 18, he had to join Hitler's army. He did not want to do that. His family was very anti-German, and he made a secret wish. He couldn't tell anybody because it wasn't a very good idea to divulge such things, but he made a secret wish that when he went into the army, he just hoped he would be captured by Americans and spend the rest of the war here in the United States. Well, he went into the army. He admits that he wasn't a very good soldier. He seemed to goof up a lot, and his superiors weren't very happy with him. 12 days after D-Day, he was captured by Americans. He just threw down his rifle, and he was so happy. He came to America, and I had heard about him. He was a legend in Grand Ledge, which is the little community in which he lived. And he wasn't just a legend because he had been a German soldier who had moved to America, but also because he was a POW here, and because when he eventually moved back to America, he became very active in his community, and he even played Uncle Sam in the town's 4th of July parade. And so it was just the irony of it all. I'd heard about him, and I had never seen him. Well, there was a social event, and he was there, and he got up to take a drink of water. And I said, I'm going to go introduce myself and ask him if there's anything written about him so I can learn more. I went up to him, and I asked him if there was a book written about him, and he said no, but people have said there should be. And I took his phone number, and I said, I'll give you a call. I'd like to talk to you more about your background. So I called him, and we set up a time where we would meet at a restaurant in Grand Ledge, and we met. And I already knew in my mind I wanted to write about him. I had never written a book before, but I thought, oh, this can't be lost to history. And so I proposed writing a book. He thought it was a great idea. And for about the next 5 or 6 months, we met at that restaurant, and we became very close friends. He was a great guy, and I would take notes from what he told me, go back, write a chapter, take it to the next meeting, have him read it, and make little changes as were necessary. And at the end, we self-published because there really wasn't time to find a publisher. That takes an awful lot of time, and it's not an easy thing to do. So we self-published, and from the time it was published in August of 1914 until 1915, he had a whole year. He was 89, and on his 90th birthday, the book had been out for 1 year. He had a wonderful last year. He was asked to speak at various venues and sign books, and he just really enjoyed that. And unfortunately, 3 weeks after his 90th birthday, he passed away. He had said in one of our meetings that he would love to go to different groups, Boy Scouts, civic organizations, etc., and tell them about the goodness of the American people. He was gone, and I thought, I can help. I can do that, and through research and writing, and so I embarked on this second book, trying to fulfill his or help his legacy along. And I mentioned in the acknowledgments how much I'm indebted to Ernst, because while I think, in fact, the best thing I think I ever did for anyone was to write his biography or help him write it. But he also changed my life, because now I'm writing books, and I never would have thought of doing that before.
Wow, what a wonderful story. So you really, you took this man's life story and put it onto paper, and it continues to be told. So in essence, he's now living on through the tale that you recorded. That's quite
I would like
something.
to think so. Yes.
That's quite something. So when you started this project, this book about German ingenuity, how long ago was that, and how long did it take you to complete the work?
I spent about 4.5 years. I don't have it written down as to when I started, but I'm guessing just by different dates. I'm guessing I spent about 4.5 years working on the book. I really didn't know much about the German impact on our culture. Sadly, I knew about classical composers. I knew about the Christmas heritage we have from Germany, and a few little things, but I really didn't know much. So I was starting from scratch. I started with going through books. I went through an awful lot of books, and I kind of just said, what are the different aspects of our culture? And from astronomy to wine, A to W, and I just would look in the index and see if Germans were mentioned. And so I was going through a lot of indexes of books, looking under the letter G, and I would find information, I would take notes, and the bibliographies in books were very helpful. What I couldn't find from books, I found online. And then one of the most helpful things is my husband and I took a lot of trips. We went to Milwaukee, we went to Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Washington, D.C. We went all over the state of Pennsylvania, Lidditz to Germantown to Gettysburg, any place where we knew that Germans had settled, had made an impact, had made a difference. And that's really where I got most of the information. It wasn't because I had it in my mind, because I was a history major as an undergraduate. I didn't learn anything to speak of that really would be something I could put in the book. It just didn't get that kind of information from my professors.
I'm not too terribly surprised. Like you, I also studied history at the university level, and you have to really specialize in order to get that kind of information. And I can only think of a few select programs that would delve into this topic at all. So I'm not overly surprised, but yeah, 4.5 years, wow, that's quite the journey. And you already touched upon that. How did you research the different topics? You said you read a lot of bibliographies and just went through the index from A to Z and looked under the letter G for German. And then you also took trips. Was there anything else? I mean, I know you used the internet as well, online resources, but did you interview people as well?
I did not. I did not do any interviews. I didn't really know anyone who had experienced the impacts that different from the average American. I know quite a few people who have German backgrounds. There's a community not too far from Lansing where Germans initially settled in Michigan, but they experienced the same things in life that I have, and so I don't see their experiences being that much different, given their ages, than I had.
That makes perfect sense. I guess it's for many people, the immigration experience is so remote. It's so far in the past, multiple generations removed, that there no longer is that personal connection. And the human mind is also, it's a little bit like a sieve. We tend to forget things and certain things just run through it.
Yes, the only individual I knew well that had emigrated was Ernst, and I do quote him in the food chapter. So if you can consider that an interview, then
I
yeah.
actually remember that. I remember that.
Yes, yes.
And as you were researching and writing this book, what was the most surprising discovery you made?
I think the most surprising was probably that I didn't know, and these sound kind of frivolous, but I knew all about the Christmas traditions, or pretty much all of it. I didn't know that we had so many traditions about Easter from Germany.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know Groundhog Day. Those were kind of surprising. In terms of the intellectual achievements, those didn't surprise me because I knew Germans just very into education and excellence, and so the things that they did that were of a more serious nature, that those didn't surprise me.
Well, no, that doesn't sound frivolous at all. And sometimes it's really the little things that count, right? I
Yes.
mean, honestly, I grew up in Germany. I wasn't born there, but I spent a significant part of my childhood and youth in Germany. And even I was surprised about the German history of Groundhog Day, because we don't really have groundhogs in many parts of Germany. They are in the Alpine region, but what we do have is badgers,
Yes.
and there are no badgers in the United States. And there is indeed an old legend about badgers emerging from their holes and from their hibernation state in the late winter, early spring. And it's a little bit later. I think it's the end of February, early March, but
Okay.
yes, so that makes sense, because when the badger supposedly sees his shadow, then it's going to be a nice spring. I think that's the routine, but don't quote me on that. I've only seen a badger once in my entire life, so I'm not the best authority to speak on that. And you said that the intellectual contributions weren't too surprising, but was there perhaps a contribution that did surprise you? Something that you hadn't known was invented or created by a German or a German American?
I think the most impressive to me was I knew that the medical contributions were significant. I didn't know the breadth of it, how many achievements, discoveries that Germans had accomplished in the mostly the 19th century. I was surprised, I think, at just how many diseases they conquered or found the cause of or the remedy for. That was the most impressive. Just how much they had and still do contribute to medical advancements.
Mm-hmm. In your book presentation, you told the tale of Teddy Roosevelt and the bullet that struck him and eventually became lodged in his body, and that it was discovered via the new technology of X-raying that it was not posing a risk to his life and health at the time, and indeed he continued to live for several more years with this bullet embedded in his body. And I have
the X-ray had only been invented 17 years earlier.
Yes.
And if there hadn't been an X-ray machine, surgeons may have tried to remove the bullet, and it may have been fatal. And so it very well may have saved Roosevelt's life.
I have a little personal tale. I went to the University of Würzburg for my first master's degree, and that's where Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen experimented, and there's a building that is named after him, and he taught medicine there. So I used to walk right past that building on an almost daily basis, and I would stop a couple of times and just look at the little plaque that was attached to the side of the building, and think, oh, wouldn't it have been amazing to have met this man and have the chance to talk to him. What was going through his mind when he discovered this? Did he realize what the impact was going to be? Because we still use X-ray technology and everything that's derived from the X-ray technology today. It's become a very, very important diagnostic tool. So I would have loved to be given the chance to ask him. Well, the time machine hasn't been invented yet. Perhaps we'll have some genius that will come forward with that invention in the future. And when your readers have this book in front of them, what do you want them to take away from your work? What lesson or lessons do you want to impart?
As I mentioned in the introduction, I feel badly that so many individuals who were born in Germany, came to this country, and then had to put up with animosity toward German Americans because of the wars. And I would hope that if a German American reads the book, he or she will feel a new sense of pride that they do have a German background, and that Germans contributed so much to culture and society, not just in the United States, but all over the world. For someone who doesn't necessarily have a German background, I would hope they would go through the pages and say, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And just kind of be wowed by things that all their life they lived, and they didn't know this, and it may be insignificant or frivolous, as I used earlier. I didn't know the Barbie doll was modeled after a doll in Germany. Just things like that. I just hope people would be entertained, and at the same time, it's kind of a renewal of American history class, because it really goes through American history. And if you were sleeping at the back of the class in your American history course, you'll pick up here, and
so it's a bit like a remedial lesson too, and it's done in an entertaining and very informative way. So perhaps a bit more enjoyable than the high school history class. The last US census discovered that some 44 million Americans claim to be of German descent, and many more may have partial German ancestry, but it's too far removed from them to really have solid knowledge of their roots. Do you feel that German contributions to US culture and lifestyle have been overlooked by the mainstream?
I think in the past that was true. I don't think it's true so much today. I think the relationship between Germany and the United States is really excellent and has been for quite some time. And so I don't think people who are in the media or press agents or corporations or professors are shy about saying this came from Germany. I know, for example, my dentist, he's very happy that his dental instruments were made in Germany because he knows that means quality. And Germany today is known for quality and excellence. But after the wars, people were even German Americans were afraid to admit they had a German background. For example, the World War I flying ace, Eddie Rickenbacker, yes,
Mm-hmm.
his parents were immigrants, and he from Germany, and he changed his name. The Backer was originally Bacher. He changed it to the H to a K, so he would be viewed as being more American. And so it wasn't always history teachers and writers and press agents that downplayed German achievements. It was also German Americans themselves because they didn't want to feel the animosity that was coming from many Americans who very unkindly, I think, just were anti-German.
Yes, I agree. But of course, that sentiment is understandable to a certain extent when you consider that there were two world wars that led to millions of deaths. And as you were telling the story about about Eddie Rickenbacker, I also thought of Bill Boeing, and his birth name was Wilhelm Boeing. So he had that very German umlaut in there. And of course, when he started in the airplane industry, in the aviation industry, it was 1917, and that was World War One, which went from 1914 to 1918. So probably not the best time to enter this industry with a very German sounding name, Wilhelm Boeing, named after the emperor too. So
Yes.
it's understandable that he went by Bill and changed it to Boeing. But same tale, right? There was a lot of animosity, and people, regular people, tried to avoid being the recipients of said animosity and tried to prove their loyalty and their patriotism.
As I was researching and writing the book, I remembered that back in the 5th grade, when I began school, first grade, we were only 5 years away from the end of World War II. And when I was in the 5th grade, a young lad from Germany became our classmate. And he was very intelligent. His name was Herman Spies. I can even remember his name. And we, as children, were in awe of him. First of all, we had never known anybody that was born in another country, and we certainly didn't know another child who knew 2 languages. We were in awe of him, and we treated him very kindly. And I was thinking, that's how children are. But it's the adults who hold the animosity when they maybe shouldn't, and children just see somebody for their qualities, and that's what way we were with Herman.
That's wonderful. I'm delighted to hear that. What happened to the little boy, do you know?
Well, he was only in my grade, the 5th grade, that year. I think I never saw him again. The only thing I could think of was that he may have been promoted. He was way ahead of us intellectually. And I think even though our school system was patterned after the Prussian system, he was still quite ahead of us. And he was either promoted 1 or 2 grades, or his parents ended up sending him to a private school. I don't know. I never saw him again. And I really hadn't given him any thought until I started working on the book.
Amazing. So that brings me to another question. How did you select the individuals and the inventions and artifacts that are listed in the book?
I would have to say that they selected themselves.
That's valid.
As I came across the individuals who had invented something, discovered something, had made this achievement, they were in the book all right away. And if the few times that maybe an achievement wasn't earth-shaking, I would at least include that individual and his or her achievement in a footnote. And I of course didn't cover the waterfront because I never even been to Germany, much less born there. But you and Hardy put in a number of individuals that I wasn't aware of, and you suggested these people, and very, very happy to include them, because it was my omission that I hadn't come across these individuals in my research. And so you and Hardy really, really added to the book.
Well, thank you so much. But of course, I mean, if we were to really include everybody, I think this would turn out to be a 10,000 page volume that probably couldn't even be carried.
Well, I did do one thing when I set out to do the book. I said only people born in Germany, only people born in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I would have included individuals who had a German heritage, you're right, it would have been much too voluminous. And so we do, I think, mention 3 or 4 individuals, such as President Eisenhower, who
wasn't born in Germany. Yes.
So there are a few exceptions, but for the most part, the book represents individuals who were actually born in Germany or Prussia, or what was a German state at the time, or even back to the Holy Roman Empire. Mm-hmm. If they were born somewhere in that vicinity, which is considered Germany now, they were in the book.
And of course, the concept of nationality wasn't always as clear cut as it is today. The whole idea of nationhood, of a nation state, is a fairly recent invention that goes back to the peace treaty of Westphalia after the 30 Years' War ended in 1648. And before that, people didn't really see themselves in terms of nationality, and it didn't matter. I mean, people moved around, and especially the upper echelons of society, aristocrats, they would be born in one country and then end up at someone's court in another country. And loyalties were changing, allegiances were changing, and it was all very much in flux. People were quite flexible. So I think some of these discussions of, but, well, I don't know, was he really German? I think we need to take that with a bit of a grain of salt, right? Because it's such a modern way of looking at things. And but if we talk about future editions, a second edition, maybe a third edition, is there an individual, or are there some individuals that you would very much like to include that you've maybe learned about since completing the writing process?
I have come across some German achievements. I can't tell you the actual names of individuals, but I have started a file. I don't think it's too early to do that. I know that whenever someone suggests someone, it would be great if this person were mentioned, and I'd say yes, because there's no way we were able to include everyone. And while we tried to keep it to those born in Germany or a German state, I'm sure that individuals are left out, and we will be very happy to include them. And also, I'd like to expound a little bit on some of the individuals we cited, where I think we could provide a little more information on them. And I think that's one of the goals of the second edition as well.
That sounds fantastic. And last but not least, allow me a very personal question, please. Do you personally have a favorite chapter or a favorite person? A favorite story?
Okay, let me think. I love the painting chapter.
Mm-hmm.
I particularly like Jacob Mantell and Krimmel. And I really like the astronomy chapter. That was fascinating to me. But I think my very favorite chapter, the one that was most fun for me to research and write about, was the music chapter. When I was growing up, there was always music in my family. My mom had a ton of sheet music, and I grew to really love the old standards. Excuse me. And when I researched Tin Pan Alley, it was just like, oh my gosh, that's where all those songs came from that I know so well. I know the words to so many of them, and because I heard them all the time when I was a child, and we had no idea that they came from German Americans in Tin Pan Alley. I mean, even the sheet music my mom had, names like Fred Fischer. Who knew that was a German? Who was another person? Gus Edwards. We had no idea that he was born in Germany. And so we just loved the music, and I was thrilled to find out that a lot of it was written by German Americans.
I have a favorite Tin Pan Alley tune too that has mostly been forgotten, but it's from the late 19th century, and it had a bit of a revival during World War I, but it's a very charming waltz. It's called Let Me Call You Sweetheart.
Yes. Oh yes. Let me call you sweetheart. I'm in love with you.
Yes, exactly. And I only discovered it about 15 years ago or so, and it was because I was watching the last film in the trilogy, Anne of Green Gables.
Mm-hmm.
And the last film was made decades after the first two, but they used that song in it, and it was such a dramatic scene, and I was quite inspired by that song. And I think it was first composed in the late 19th century, could have been the early 20th century, but it became a World War I favorite amongst homesick soldiers and their sweethearts back at home.
Yes. Much of the music had a nostalgic flavor to it, and being an emotional person, I just kind of really identified with that music.
Well, thank you so very much, Lynn. And to our viewers, if you want to learn more about the contributions of Germans and German Americans to US culture, you can go on our website at www.gamusa.org and buy your own copy of How German Ingenuity Inspired America. Thank you so much, Lynn. Welcome to our book presentation tonight of How German Ingenuity Inspired America. More fun, more beauty, more freedom, with author Lynne Breen. My name is Katja Sipple, and I'm the Executive Director of GAHF. And today is actually a holiday. It's President's Day, and I'm so glad that everybody was able to join us. We have a very special guest this evening, Mr. Clifton Truman Daniel, a writer and actor and the oldest grandson of the 33rd President, Harry S. Truman, who was in office from April 1945 to January 1953. Until recently, he served as the Director of Public Relations for Truman College in Chicago. And before that, he was a feature writer and an editor for the Morning Star and the Sunday Star News in Wilmington, North Carolina. He is also on the Board of Trustees at the Truman Library Institute in Missouri, and since 2017, he has been portraying his famous grandfather's life and presidency in Samuel Gallow's Give 'Em Hell, Harry. You can learn more about his work by visiting his website at www.ctrumandaniel.com. And Clifton, you have written a wonderful endorsement for our book. Thank you so much. And those of the participants who've read it will already know that Clifton's wife, Polly's ancestor, a German immigrant named Bernhard Martin Jacobson, served as a US representative, whilst your grandfather was in the Senate. So just tell us a little bit about that connection. It's so fascinating.
Yes, thank you, Katja. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Yes, that's true. I think I believe I wrote on the back of the book that while Germany has given this country many, many things, it has personally given me, my wife, my family, and by extension, children, as well as I think I also said dachshunds and Cracker Jacks too, which also very important. But yes, thank you very much. And I think, and of course, we were talking earlier about my grandfather's own German background. You don't think of Truman as being a German name, but of course his maternal grandfather, Solomon Young, Y-O-U-N-G, was originally Jung, J-U-N-G. And he was a towering figure in my grandfather's early life, and I think throughout his life, helped give him the background, the ideals that he carried through the rest of his life, the work ethic, the straightforward manner, no nonsense, not suffering fools gladly at all. My grandfather remembered that when he was very, very young, great-grandpa Young sat him down on his lap and said, "Harry, if you ever run into a fella who howls too long on Saturday night and prays too loud on Sunday morning, go home and lock your smokehouse. You don't trust people like that." So that whole work ethic, that what became, I think, our one of the great backbones of this country, the hard work and fair treatment and being straightforward came from his grandfather, his own grandfather, Solomon Young. And of course, Bernhard Jacobson, as you mentioned, was Polly's great-grandfather. And he and my grandfather were on Capitol Hill at the same time. It was only 2 years, unfortunately. Congressman Jacobson died in 1936. My grandfather was a senator in 1934, and Congressman Jacobson's son, Bill, took over for him. So that the legacy kept going for a while. So we have that background, and I think what's nice about Lynne's work on this book is, when you all contacted me the first time, this made me think about all of this. You don't on a daily basis. We all should think about our background on a daily basis, but we don't. And just seeing so much of what came to this country from Germany, so much in the way of art and medicine, and all sorts of wonderful things, make you start thinking about your own family. And it was nice to remember all of that I have Germany on both sides of my family, married into it, and have it in my own family. So it's a wonderful job. And we were talking earlier again, you asked me about, was there something that stuck out to me in the contributions of Germany. And it was only recently something I did not realize. the German tradition of tying beautifully decorated Easter eggs to the branches of trees. And I did not know that was a German tradition. And for the first time this year, and I don't know who it was, but one of our neighbors in Chicago came down the whole block tying Easter eggs to everybody's tree branches. It was really very nice. I'm not sure that's the very first time they've done it. It's the first time that it's been on our tree in front of the house and up and down the block. It was really pretty. And of course, we were joking earlier that the last one of those eggs just came down about 2 weeks ago when I finally could reach it, or the string got frayed or old enough. It finally came off the branches of the tree. But I'm looking forward to this because, Lynne has taken so long and worked so hard to put all of this material together to find all of these gems among Germany's contributions to the United States.
Well, thank you so very much. The Easter egg tradition is indeed a lovely one. And of course, Christmas is also heavily German influence. The whole tradition of the Christmas tree, just like the decorated Easter tree, came from Germany. And I just recently got rid of my Christmas tree and picked up the pine needles this afternoon that were still spread in certain places. So...
You and us both. We just threw it out. We had to. It finally got dry. We thought it was a miracle tree. It kept drinking water for 2.5 months, and it just sat there in the window. We loved it, and the smell. And then one day, Polly grabbed a branch and went, "Ooh, fire hazard."
Correct. Exactly. Yes. So same thing here. Just finally got rid of it. Well, thank you so very much, Clifton. I'm so thankful and a bit starstruck that you're here today. And I am going to introduce Lynne. As you said, she has done a tremendous job in researching this. This was years of work. Of course, a book like this doesn't write itself overnight. And she is not a first-time author either. She has previously co-authored I'll See You Again, Lady Liberty, the true story of a German prisoner of war in America with the late Ernst Flöter. Lynne has been a writer for a long time. She worked for the state of Michigan and the University of Connecticut, and she also served on the faculty of Northwest Community College. She holds master's degrees in journalism and in education from Michigan State and Eastern Michigan universities, and she is an avid traveler. She and her husband, Earl, reside in Lansing, Michigan. I believe there's probably snow on the ground there too, right?
Yes.
And Lynne, I'm handing over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Katja.
Thank you.
There's an old adage, never follow a Lincoln. After listening to Clifton, I think there should be a new adage, never follow the grandson of a Truman. I have something I want to show you that Clifton doesn't know about. Well, he's seen it, but he doesn't know I'm going to show the audience. It is a picture of him and his grandpa, President Truman. This is on your hobby horse, Clifton. I think you fell off it once. I read a little story, and your grandpa told you to get right back on it, if you remember. Yes.
Yep. No sympathy whatsoever. Made me get back on and ride it again. And as soon as he went back behind the newspaper, I snuck off and got out of there. It was safer that way.
You were about 5 or 6 in this picture.
4.
You were 4.
4, yeah.
4. Well, you were adorable then, just as you are charming now. So I was very happy to find this photograph of you. Before we take our little journey across the United States, I want to thank 3 people and acknowledge a 4th. First of all, I hope Ernie Weiler is tuned in. He is the first person to in our little family here to see my manuscript, and apparently Ernie saw some merit in it, and he gave it to Hardy, who just took off and ran with it, and he did everything he could to make sure that it became a book, and I'm forever grateful to Hardy for that. And he in turn introduced me to Katja, who is a dream to work with. So I want to thank you three individuals very much. And because it's President's Day, I want to acknowledge Don, our new president. One of the first things he did upon becoming president was to send me an email saying how much he liked the book. And that meant a lot to me. So I want to extend my appreciation to Don as well. This is your day, Don. It's President's Day. I hope you're celebrating. We're going to take a road trip. We're going to begin in Massachusetts. We're not going to be able to go to all 50 states. We just don't have time. And I also want to mention that a number of states have many more German contributions and achievements within them than others. So I just kind of did this randomly. I thought we would go to Massachusetts first because it's a picture. This is the first picture of a president of the United States, a German-American lithographer. His name was Philip Haas. He was one of the top lithographers in Washington, D.C. He produced his first picture of John Quincy Adams, who was our sixth president, by taking a daguerreotype and making it into a lithograph. And this was in 1843. I hope I'm showing it up high enough. Adams was already out of the White House. His term was 1825 to 1829. He took a hiatus after he left the presidency, but then he ran for the House of Representatives. It was in 1843 when he was serving in the House that Mr. Haas made this first picture of a president. I'm going to take a drink of water. I want to assure you that it is water. Since I'm your designated driver, I didn't think it was good. And Clifton told me it probably wasn't a good idea anyway. We're going to stay in, but we're going to go to the Boston area. Walter Gropius, he was a founder of the Bauhaus movement, art movement in Germany. In the 1930s, he felt it was a good idea to move to the United States. He was one of the movers and shakers in the architecture field here. He helped usher in the international movement. And in Boston, he designed this building, and I think I've got it up high enough. It is the John Fitzgerald Kennedy building in Boston. It's a federal building, and it is, it's actually 2 stories. I'm just showing you the one, but it's two 26-story towers and then connected to one 4-story tower. The building for it started in 1963, and John Kennedy was still alive at that time. But when he was assassinated on November 22nd of that year, it was decided they would name it the John Fitzgerald Kennedy Federal Building. It was completed in 1966, and it has been complemented by many architects. And one of the quotes I have here is that it is one of the federal government's most noteworthy modern designs. We're going to take a little trip south into Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, probably more than any other state, has so much of a rich history in German American, you name it. I think what I'm going to tell you about, I'm just going to tell you one thing, because we've got so many other states to go to, but I think the most important thing is that the very first German settlement occurred in Pennsylvania. 13 families, they were Quakers and Mennonites. They got on a ship, it was called the Concord. They were fleeing religious persecution in Germany. They decided to come to this country. It was 1683, and they settled in a little hamlet called Germantown. It's now part of Philadelphia, but at the time it was its own little village. I'm going to take you next to Maryland. A German American in Maryland, he founded the little town of Hagerstown. It's kind of in the north part of Maryland. He built, this home, it's rather a typical, once they moved from log cabins to actual homes, the German Americans built a lot of stone homes. The walls were about 1.5 to 2 feet thick to help with insulation. And you'll notice that it has a central chimney so that the heat would circulate all around the house. And the really neat thing, and this is where I think the term German ingenuity comes in, is that Jonathan Hager built it over a natural spring. And this allowed the family to have fresh, clean water all year round. They could wash and cook with the clean water. And you can take a tour of the house. It's open for tours. I don't know if it is right at this moment, but it generally is open for tours. And the guide will take you into the basement. You can see the spring. Another really neat thing about the basement, when Jonathan Hager built the home, he divided the basement in half. In the wintertime, when the farm animals, it was just too cold for them, and I'm an animal lover, so I really appreciated this, that the family would bring the animals into the basement and to keep them warm. And another German ingenuity thing about it was the heat from the animals helped keep the house warm. So we're going to go now to Ohio. The Wright brothers grew up and lived most of their lives in Dayton, Ohio. I don't have a picture of Dayton. What I have is a picture of a hang glider named Otto Lilienthal. He was the German, not American, he never moved here. He was the German who invented the first manned hang glider, and he was the inspiration for the Wright brothers. He is right up here. He's a little fuzzy because he's in motion, but you can see the men below. They're in focus because they're still in watching Otto, and he died in a glider accident. And ever after that, the Wright brothers decided that even though they had always admired him, they decided they have got to go into aeronautics. And as a result, in 1903, they flew the first plane at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Now, if you're in Ohio, it's pretty easy to get into Kentucky because a German American named John Roebling, he built a bridge. It connected Cincinnati, Ohio, to Covington, Kentucky. Here's the bridge. It looks today pretty much as it did then. It was painted blue back then, and it is now. And Roebling built it in 1866. It had begun just before the Civil War, but because of the war, building had to stop, and then it was completed in 66. On the Kentucky side of the bridge, there is a life-size statue of Roebling. And also I want to mention that when the bridge was first built, it was called the Cincinnati-Covington Bridge, and then after a while, they renamed it the John Roebling Bridge. When we talk about German contributions and achievements in our country, we usually go to big cities, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York, and so on. I want to show you this picture and tell you a little bit about this sculpture because it was in a small town, and it is a lion that was sculpted by a German American. We don't know much about him. We don't know his first name, but his last name was Haytrich. He couldn't speak English, and so he had a 10-year-old son who interpreted for him. This is in Rochester, Indiana. Haytrich sculpted 10 of these lions, and they are all over. They encircle the Fulton County Courthouse. Rochester is the county seat in Fulton County, and there's a little plaque on the wall of the courthouse, pretty much saying just what I told you. And I just wanted to emphasize that small towns have German cultural artifacts as well as our big cities. I'm going to take another drink. And it's kind of appropriate because we're going to go to Michigan, and Michigan is the Great Lakes state where we have lots of water. And we'll go to Detroit. That's Motown, Motor City. And there's an irony that I'd never caught until about 2 weeks ago. Ford's Model T was hugely successful. From what I can remember reading, 15 million of that particular car was sold before production was halted. Well, Hitler knew about the Model T, and he knew that it was considered the people's car. And he decided he wanted a people's car. And so the Volkswagen came into being. Well, the Volkswagen ended up as one of its export countries, the United States, and during the 1950s, you could see Volkswagen Beetles all over our highways. And General Motors in Detroit, was watching, and the Volkswagen Beetle was very, very popular. And at that time, there were no subcompacts in America. It just didn't exist. And General Motors decided to keep up with the Volkswagen sales, they were going to have to develop a subcompact, and it turned out to be the Chevrolet Corvair. And so the irony of Ford to Volkswagen to the subcompact here in Michigan. Now, anyone who's from Michigan knows why I'm putting up my hand here. The lower peninsula of Michigan is shaped like a mitten. And if you ask anybody who's from Michigan, where do I find this town or this lake in Michigan? The Michiganian will hold up his or her hand and they'll say, well, Detroit's about here. Well, we want to go to Wisconsin next, but we got Lake Michigan here. So we're going to drive across to Ludington, and then we're going to get on a car ferry. There's a car ferry called the Badger, and it will take you right over to Wisconsin. So this is what we've done. We're now in Wisconsin. We're going to drive down to Milwaukee, and we're going to come upon another president. This is President Theodore Roosevelt. He was president from 1901 to 1909, and then in 1912, he decided he wanted to run for president again, and he had his own party. It was the Progressive Party, but it was also nicknamed the Bull Moose Party. And he was campaigning. This was on October 14th, 1912, and I'm going to show you a picture of Teddy as he's campaigning there in Milwaukee. It was a long speech, but at the beginning of it, he was shot in the chest. Fortunately, he had his 50-page speech rolled up in his coat pocket, and he also had a glasses case in it, and so it slowed the bullet down. So they called Teddy Roosevelt old, rough, and ready, and he was ready for that apparently, because he talked for 90 more minutes after he was shot. He would not accept medical attention until after he finished his speech. Well, he finally went to the hospital after the speech was over, and they took an X-ray. X-rays were invented by Wilhelm Röntgen in Germany in 1895. 17 years later, it was determined because of an X-ray that Teddy Roosevelt did not need surgery, that it was safer for him to keep the bullet in his body. It had lodged between two ridges. It was of no danger. And so he lived with it for 6 years until he passed away. So a German invented the X-ray. Now, I think Clifton is really going to be happy about this next thing. He mentioned Cracker Jacks, and we have Cracker Jacks here. And we also have some Pabst Blue Ribbon beer. And we also have a Hershey bar. And it's like we're getting ready for the Super Bowl. But I kind of want to take us back in time to the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893. That is when Pabst Blue Ribbon was introduced. It's when two German-American brothers from Chicago introduced Cracker Jack. But most important to talkaholics like me, it was the beginning of chocolate in this country. Milton Hershey of Hershey chocolate bar fame, he attended the World's Fair, and he was going around to the different buildings, and he went into the Mechanical Arts building, and he saw a full, at this time he was only making caramels in Bloomington, Illinois and Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He saw this full production line from the cocoa bean all the way to the finished candy bar. He was amazed, and he kept going back and looking at it, and he said, you know, this is the future of candy making, chocolate. And so, and oh, by the way, the man who presented the full production line, his name was J.M. Lehman. And Lehman had this whole thing set up, and Hershey, he had to have it. And so he told Lehman he wanted to buy it. He bought it, lock, stock, and barrel. He had it put on a train, and he sent it to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And that's where Hershey chocolate started. And I'm for one, I'm very happy. And I like the dark chocolate. That's why we've got the special dark bar here. We're going to go to Nebraska, and I'm going to ask you to remember something I tell you about Nebraska. Well, we're going to go to Lincoln, which is kind of neat because it's President's Day, and the capital of Nebraska is named after President Lincoln. A lot of German Americans who came to this country were artists in one way or another, architects or painters, and a lot of them were sculptors. A man named Lee Lowry, he was asked to come to Lincoln and put a figure on top of their newly built, this is 1932, their newly built Capitol building. And what I want you to remember is that the Capitol building, 400 feet high, 400 feet high. And what Lee Lowry did, he fashioned, and this is, I got my fingers over it. He fashioned, this is called the sower, and the man has a seed bag, and the importance of this sculpture was to kind of commemorate the importance of agriculture in Nebraska's history. The actual bronze statue is 19 feet tall. Now, we got to remember, 400 feet high, the whole Capitol building. We're going to go to another Capitol building in Oregon. We've just gone through the Rockies, so I have to have another drink because I kind of get a little nervous going through mountains. Okay, We are in Salem, Oregon, and the capital of Oregon, Salem. And if I got that right, okay. This is called the Oregon Pioneer. This statue also has a nickname, Gold Man. And the capital of Salem was built in 1932. And Lee Lawrie, I'm sorry, I said Lee Lawrie, he was the one for Nebraska. A German-American sculptor named Ulrich Ellerhausen was commissioned to fashion Gold Man. Ellerhausen at the time was living in New Jersey. He sculpted this figure. He did it in bronze, and then he covered it with gold leaf. After he finished it, he had to get it to Oregon. So he put it on a ship. It sailed down the Atlantic. It went through the Panama Canal. He came up to Oregon, put on a train, and then finally on a truck to get it right to Oregon. Now, and by the way, just for some statistics here, he's 22 feet high. And even though he's hollow, he weighs 8.5 tons. And I tried to get a better picture, but as you can see, it looks like his pants are on fire. But I have it on good authority that he has never told a lie. We're going to go down to Hollywood now, have some fun in Hollywood in California. A number of German immigrants to America were pioneers in Hollywood, in the film industry. For example, beginning in the silent film era. One of the more respected was Carl Laemmle. He founded Universal Studios, and one of the many movies that came out of Universal was Hunchback of Notre Dame. It's amazing when you read about the different movies. It's like they're all the best movies that we've seen. Ernst Lubitsch, his first talkie was The Love Parade, and it just happened to be also the first musical. He created the first musical in film history. He paired up Maurice Chevalier and Jeanette MacDonald for The Love Parade, his first talkie and the world's first musical. Also, Mike Nichols, a little later on, he, among many other movies, did The Graduate, and it for that year became Best Picture. I'm going to show you a couple of German Americans who came to Hollywood. The person on my right is Werner Klemperer. You'll know him from Hogan's Heroes, but he also starred in Judgment at Nuremberg with Marlene Dietrich. And I put these two together because they were in the movie together. She, of course, is famous not only for her acting in a number of well-known movies, but also as a singer. I particularly admire her because when Hitler came to power, she left Germany, and United States was in the war by this time, 1941. 1942, she put on a United States uniform, went to Europe and entertained our troops. And I just have so much admiration for that. I also want to mention about Werner Klemperer. He would not take the role of Colonel Klink in Hogan's Heroes unless Colonel Klink was a bumbling fool. He didn't want the person to be one you could really admire and respect. And I thought that was pretty neat too. I think it's a fun little story. We're in Texas now. And you're probably all going to recognize what kind of a cake. That's the German Black Forest cake, and it was developed back in 1927 in a restaurant nearby by a man whose name was Josef Taylor. But a lot of people think that German chocolate cake is also German. Well, it turned out back in, let's see, what year was it? 1852, a man named Sam German, his last name was German, Sam, he worked for the Baker chocolate company, and in 1852 he came up with a special sweet baking chocolate. And 105 years later, this would have been in 1957, a housewife in Dallas, Texas, she made up her own recipe for a chocolate cake, and she used Sam's chocolate. And at the time, it was called German's chocolate, and German's with an apostrophe S. Well, her recipe was very popular, and it ended up in the Dallas newspaper, and so they called it German chocolate cake, although they had left off the apostrophe S. So that's how we got German chocolate cake. It did not come from Germany, it came from Dallas, Texas. Okay, now I think you all remember 400 feet high. Okay. We're in Louisiana now. We're in the state capital, Baton Rouge, and it is 1930, well, let's say it's 1930. We'll go back a couple years. Huey Long was the governor of Louisiana. He had aspirations. He had a falling out with FDR. He decided he wanted to become president, and he's had kind of a checkered history, but let's just call him colorful or controversial, but he was quite a character. He was like in Nebraska, he was having a new Capitol building built, and Nebraska had just finished the building their Capitol, and theirs was 400 feet high. Well, Huey Long had to have his a little taller, so he directed his contractors that his would be 450 feet high. And where German Americans come in, he didn't hire just one German American sculptor, he hired three. I've already mentioned two, Lee Lowry, Ulrich Ellerhausen, and the third one was Adolf Weinman. And they provided all of the sculptural elements for this new Capitol in Baton Rouge. And when it was finished, when the state capitol was finished at 400 feet, it was the tallest one in the United States, and it still is. We're going to go through Virginia before we get to our end, Washington, D.C. Virginia is noted because, talking about President's Day, more presidents were born in Virginia than in any other state. Virginia gave birth to 8 presidents. Ohio, it came in second. It only had 7 presidents. So, I'd like to close. We're now in Washington. I'd like to close with someone who really didn't have so much ingenuity as he did genius, and that's our Albert Einstein. This is a bronze memorial to him. It was completed I need to give you the date, April 22nd, 1979. It was unveiled on that date because that was the 100th anniversary of Einstein's birth. It's, as I said, it's a bronze memorial. If you go on the National Mall, you will find it on the grounds of the National Academy of Sciences. And I think that's the end of our trip. Katja?
Thank you so much, Lynn. That was very fascinating. And you know, when you talked about Hollywood there, I was just yesterday evening watching an old black and white film. I happen to really love those. It was Arsenic and Old Lace with Cary Grant, who was an English American, but the book, the playbook for this film, and actually the theater play, was written by a man named Joseph Kesselring. And he had German ancestry on both sides, the maternal side and the paternal side. And I thought, isn't that neat? When the end credits were rolling, it was just full of German names. And I thought, wow, here it is, 1944, and all these German names are popping up on the screen. So time is up. I want to give a special shout out again to Clifton Truman Daniel. And I encourage you to watch his performance. You can visit his website at www.ctrumandaniel.com. And he's also on YouTube. He does a wonderful, wonderful performance as his grandfather. And he's also done lectures and talks. And of course, thank you to Lynne Breen for taking the time today, and thank you for making this book possible, for working with us. I know this last year, this last summer in particular, was a tremendous marathon at times, but I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the evening, or if you're on the West Coast in another part of the country, a wonderful afternoon. And if you have any questions, just send us an email at info@gahmusa.org. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening, everybody.
Thank you, Katja. Good job, Lynn.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.